So, one of the things I've been saying is that there are social sciences like psychology and sociology, and what makes them a science is you use the scientific method. And how do you use the scientific method? Well, number one, you come up with a question. What would you like to solve? What is a question that you have? Number two, you come up with a hypothesis. Let's say your question was, I wonder if I put inspirational quotes and images on a bridge, if suicides would go down, right? Your hypothesis would be, if we put inspirational photos and quotes on the bridge, then suicides would go down. Which leads us to this. If you use if and then, that will help you write a hypothesis. Now, of course, you can write a hypothesis without if and then, but it's a little bit of a cheat note. If you use if and then, that will help you write a hypothesis. There is a lot of ways to write a hypothesis, but this is a very elementary form and a very simple form. If you study with flashcards, then your grades will improve. Maybe that's true. Something you would have to test for yourself. Now, one of the things we need to know about a hypothesis is there is an independent variable which causes change, and then there is a dependent variable. It might change. You need to know these two terms. Now, independent variable causes change. I'm going to tell you a little secret. The independent variable will always follow the word if. If you study with flashcards, if you study with friends, if you study for 30 minutes at a time, if you study at night, if you study in the library. If you try something different, then something might happen. So on the test, I'm going to tell you which is the independent variable. All you have to do is find the word if, and you found the independent variable. That's it, you found it. If I do cardio in the morning, then I might lose weight. If I ate more vegetables. If you try something, that's the independent variable. And then, very simple, on the test, if I ask you to look for the dependent variable, you got to look for the word then. Then your grades might improve if you study with flashcards. Now, what if I try and trick you on the test? What if it says your grades will improve if you study with flashcards? I reversed the order here. Is the independent variable still following the word if? The answer is yes. So, it doesn't matter if the word if is at the beginning or the word if is in the middle. All you have to do is you find the word if, you have found your independent variable. Very, very simple. Here's a sentence. Students won't have any A's if they play a lot of Xbox. Let's flip it. If students play a lot of Xbox, then they won't have any A's. There's the word if. So your independent variable would be playing a lot of Xbox. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is the word operational definitions. These are precise ways to measure variables. Now, one of the things we need to know when we test a hypothesis is, let's say that someone is doing the study in San Antonio and someone is doing the study in Seattle. It says here, if students listen to a lot of rock music, then they will be aggressive. If someone is in Seattle is doing this and someone in San Antonio is doing this, there are words in here which they could misinterpret. I'm talking about the operational definition. If you look at this sentence, which word could they misinterpret? Interesting. So on the test, I might tell you which word needs an operational definition. What I'm saying is which word is too vague and it needs to be more specific. For example, in this hypothesis, well, what do you mean if students? Who are you talking about? You're talking about junior high? You're talking about high school? Are you talking about only freshmen? Or freshmen, and so who are you talking about? So for students, we'll say, oh, well, it means freshmen. Which word also needs to be a little bit more specific in this sentence up here? Which word needs an operational definition? Or you could say, well, if students listen to a lot, how much is a lot? More than 2 hours? More than 3? Or more than half an hour? So we're going to say a lot is more than 1 hour a day. What do you mean by rock music? There's a lot of rock music. Are you talking about old rock music like AC/DC and Iron Maiden? Or are you talking about more modern rock music? So for the sake of this, we're going to say more modern rock music. And we'll even list some, like say Korn and Disturbed and Ghost. What do you mean by aggressive? Do you mean getting in fights or yelling? For the sake of this fake experiment, we'll say, oh, well, if they're getting referrals in school. So on the test, I might say, hey, which word needs an operational definition? You can look for, well, which word is too vague? Students, a lot, words like that. So now the two people in San Antonio and in Seattle both are exactly on the same page, and they know what this hypothesis is studying. Now, the scientific method. Number 1, you have a question. Number 2, there's a hypothesis. Number 3, you do the research. Has this been studied before? To what extent? A lot or just a little bit? Number 4, what are the results? Number 5, and what are the conclusions? Did you prove or did you disprove your hypothesis? And there you have it. It's the scientific method. If you think back to when you took biology, I'm sure in the classroom on the wall there was something that said, the scientific method, number 1, you do this. Number 2, you do this. It's the same thing. It's the scientific method. Now, when you do research, how could you do research? Well, you could always conduct a survey. A survey is simply a questionnaire. Now, whenever you do research, there's different strengths to each way of doing research. So, for the survey, I wrote here the letter S, and the letter S means strength. So, what are the strengths of a survey? Well, number 1 is it's cheap. It doesn't cost a lot of money to create a survey. In fact, you can do it at your house with just a pen and a paper. You could create a survey. Number 2, it's very quick. You could conduct a survey. You could survey 100 people in one day. In fact, you could probably do a survey of 200 to 300 people in one day if you really want to. And number 3, it's anonymous. It's private. The people can stay anonymous and maybe be a little more honest. So, how do you do research for your how do you test your hypothesis? Well, one way is you could conduct a survey. Another way, and a weakness, is that people could lie. That is a weakness of a survey. For the sake of the test, though, let's just focus on the strengths. But it's true, if people do a survey, they could lie. But for the sake of the test, we're only going to focus on the strengths. Okay. You could also conduct an experiment. That's where you create an artificial environment. You know, you create a little world and you see how people respond to that. The strength is you're in control over the setting. You control the actors. You control the actors, the environment. You control the variables. There's a show called, Hey, What Would You Do? And what would you do if you were in this place and this little scenario was happening? That's a social experiment. Now, the show is just made for TV and it's made more for fun. But in actuality, you could conduct a social experiment. Another way of conducting research is you could do a case study. You study the individual or group to learn universal principles. There's a show called Mindhunter, and that's where serial killers were interviewed and they were trying to create kind of a profile of who becomes a serial killer and why. And it's a very good show, Mindhunter. You should check it out. The strength. The strength is very specific and it's in-depth information. You interview the people and you find out information, very detailed information. So case studies are a really good way of conducting and testing a hypothesis. Your hypothesis could be that perhaps people that had a horrible childhood would become serial killers. Well, that's something that you could test, right? By doing a case study. A weakness could be that once you get the information, it's way too specific and you can't really use it in the real world. If you interview hundreds of serial killers, that information is really only useful for serial killers and not really to anyone else. And that's a weakness. But again, for the sake of the exam, we're focusing on the strengths. Another way of conducting information, or doing research, I should say, is called naturalistic observation. And you observe in the natural setting. You're just kind of watching. Let's say you observed different high schools in one city, and you were trying to figure out, why are these high school students in this high school happier or get better grades than the other high schools? Well, you could go and you could look around and you could observe the different high schools and what is that high school doing right compared to that the other high schools are doing completely wrong. And that's naturalistic observation, where you just go and you observe. Another way for naturalistic observation is they look at social media and they look at trends and what are people doing and how are they doing it. Naturalistic observation, one of the good things about it is you don't have to mess with people. You don't have to interview them like a case study, or you don't have to talk to people like a survey. You literally are just watching what is going on in the real world, and you don't even have to get involved with people. So, what is a strength of naturalistic observation? The strength is simply that you're not controlling the situation. You're just observing what's going on. You're just looking at what's happening in the world. You don't have to control anything. You're simply writing it down and you're simply looking for patterns.